Manifestation and time, the relative nature. Hi, welcome to Spiritual Silvera. In this video, we are going to clarify the relative nature of time, which might help us understand it better both in terms of physics and also manifestation. Towards the end, we are going to discuss its implications in terms of manifestation. Time is something that is both obvious and yet so complicated at the same time. According to Wikipedia, time is the continued sequence of existence and events that occur in an apparently irreversible succession from the past, through the present, and into the future. The keyword here is apparently, because the reality is much more complicated than that. We measure time on the basis of what the clock reads. That makes it seem so universal and objective. It's like no matter what we do, time will keep flowing. However, as Einstein's theory of relativity puts it, everything is relative, even time itself. In truth, time isn't a number that can be measured. It isn't quantifiable, but rather it is a perceived direction in which things flow. But then what is it that we are measuring in seconds, if not time itself? You are really measuring other units and interpreting the passage of time through those units. If you really look closely, we are always measuring time in terms of other units, most commonly length. The most common standard for that is the position of the hands of a clock. We say that it is 12 p.m. only because the arm of the clock is pointing towards the digits. Even in ancient times, before the clock was invented, people would measure time by the position of the sun. Instinctually, we sense time through the amount of ambient daylight. This is how we have been programmed for centuries. Therefore, the quantity of time isn't something that is fundamental but rather a consequence of something else. The flow of time is an illusion, that is a consequence of motion itself. We can detect the passage of time only by the events of motion. If everything in our consciousness froze, it would seem that time itself stopped. When I say everything, I am including our conscious ability to process information as well. But that would be difficult to conceptualize because, without our ability to perceive time, time itself would hold little to no meaning. In fictional films, writers portray characters who are really fast, such as DC's Flash or Marvel's Quicksilver, by slowing down the environment relative to them. There are two interpretations of the scenario relative to either character: either they are moving really fast or time itself has slowed down. Context is important in both these scenarios. What is it relative to which they have sped up or slowed down? You will notice that we are always assigning clock time or solar time as the standard. Many times in our lives, we perceive an hour to be either really slow or really fast, like the blink of an eye, depending on the activities performed. A boring task takes a really long time, whereas exciting moments seem to end in the blink of an eye. When we look at the clock, we are kind of sinking back into the standard solar time. However, in our local consciousness, we are almost always faster or slower relative to what the clock reads. When we feel like an hour is twice as slow, it is as good as 2 hours. When it is twice as fast, it is as good as half an hour in terms of productivity. It would seem that time is flowing relative to our consciousness. So the fact that something has moved is what creates the illusion of this flow. So why am I calling this an illusion? Well, for all intents and purposes of this three-dimensional reality, time is as real as it gets. You would still have to be accountable for it to some degree. However, in order to understand its illusory nature, let's take an example. When I was a kid commuting on a school bus, I would often look at the pavement and clouds above that would seem to move away in the opposite direction relative to which the bus was moving. I would be perplexed simply because I knew that the clouds and the pavement were still. Their motion was just an illusion because the bus was in real motion. When I grew up and read about Einstein's theory of relativity and motion, I realized that nothing was truly real or illusory unless we defined the frame of reference. So if the frame of reference was the bus, then the bus itself was still and everything else was moving away, including the pavement, clouds, and everything I could see. However, if my frame of reference was the road, then the motion of clouds and pavements were indeed illusions. We can brush off anything as relative at this point. However, There are certain frames of reference that are more universal than others. In the example of the bus, the ground is the more universal frame of reference, and in the case of time, the clock is considered the standard. Therefore, if we said that consciousness is moving through time or that time is moving through consciousness, we would be correct in both cases. However, the latter explanation assigns a higher priority and realness to consciousness itself. If we subscribe to the first idea, we would be living our lives the way we have been living this entire time, where we are delegating our power to something external. In terms of manifestation, everything that has happened or will happen constitutes what is known as unity. Time is what enables us to view the complexities of infinity as finite slices. It trivializes the idea for our three-dimensional minds to grasp it better. It limits the amount of information that is available to our senses at a time so that we don't get overwhelmed. For example, we perceive any 3D object as numerous slices of 2D images. We recombine these images later to get a sense of the 3D nature. However, we are not capable of holding the entire 3D object instantaneously in our minds in its entirety.